So I don't think your degree should limit you in terms of what your career is going to look like. Yes, you can be smart about it if you want, but I think you should lead more with curiosity rather than trying to make sure that, okay, this is the only path and this is step one and there's going to be a step two that has to be linear. So you lead with curiosity, learn as much as you can. I think also the problem is, what's the best degree, best job?
Yeah.
I think that's the problem. We're trying to optimize too early in our careers, and that doesn't work. Instead of optimizing, I think we should be building optionality. Very early in your career, what matters is optionality. What will open more doors for you rather than close them? So try not to restrict yourself too much, because that's those first 3-4 years, even after your degree, are mostly exploratory, where you're trying to figure out what works for you. And so, yeah, I think the stress, I get it, but I think that stress is a little misplaced because of the wrong kind of expectations and the wrong kind of perception that we have of what success in a career looks like.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Aspire Talks. So, we spend a lot of time telling students to choose wisely, but not enough time talking about what happens when choices change, priorities shift, or reality doesn't match the plan. Our guest today is Sana Khalid, someone who's made bold career moves, questioned her choices, and built a path that doesn't follow the usual straight line. Sana, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So I feel like I'm not going to be able to do justice to your incredible career trajectory and all of the things you've accomplished. So I'd love if you could, just tell us a little about yourself, what you do for a living, and how did you end up where you are?
What I do for a living is a layered question at the moment, but I think it's also an interesting timing for us to have this conversation, because I'm currently at an inflection point in my career where I'm rethinking once more
Okay.
what I want to do next. So what I do right now is, like, 2 years ago, I quit my job. I moved to Bali with the intention that I wanted to slow down, rethink what I'm doing with my life, what I want to do next in terms of work, how I want to design my life, and so on and so forth. So I've used these 2 years
Mhm.
to sort of launch a lot of small experiments,
Okay.
which kept me busy, but also in the hope that I will stumble across what I want to do next, right? So I did a program for CEOs who are trying to get out of the day to day of their business and operate like a CEO. I launched a podcast. So I know how hard this is. And I did a lot of advisory work for founders, for accelerators, for platforms trying to connect entrepreneurs to capital, so on and so forth. So at the moment, that is what I'm doing for a living, is launching experiments that bring in revenue for me, but at the same time help me find what I want to do next. But in terms of my past life or career, I've been a two-time founder and a two-time CEO. I've worked across industries. I started my career in
Okay.
audit and accounting. I did a 3-year articleship in Dubai at an audit firm. That's where my career started.
Wow.
And then I came on a sabbatical back to Pakistan, but decided to launch a business, which was for ONA level students trying to get better grades.
Okay.
But I was hoping that we could give them a better way of learning, and that failed miserably. So we pivoted and we did a lot of other things and so on and so forth. But that's how Minerva came into being, which is the organization that I launched at that point in time. And since that failed, um, it sort of became my playing ground for trying out new things in the same space. So we did a lot of workshops, we did gaming competitions, we did leadership trainings, we did a lot of different things in that sandbox called Minerva. And to date, it remains that.
Okay.
Um, and then I moved to Karachi around 8-9 years ago. And the Hive was setting up at that point in time. And interestingly, how I stumbled upon that job was that while being in Islamabad, when the Hive was launched, I was one of the first people to go and have a look at the space and meet the owner or the founder and ask him what they were doing and whether I can help them with events, because we used to do a lot of events at Minerva, or with trainings at their space, so on and so forth. So when I moved to Karachi, he was like, we're opening up a space in Karachi. Do you want to come on board as a community manager? And I was like, Sure, it sounds fun. Lots of events, so on and so forth. Minerva's in Islamabad. I don't know what to do in Karachi.
Hmm.
We can continue to work on Minerva remotely and do these little experiments. That's how I stumbled upon real estate and the co-working industry. So moved from being a founder to becoming an employee in the co-working space. Um, and then I, in a few years, became the CEO of the Hive. So that was, I think, if I count how many careers I've had, I've already probably had like four different careers. So the founder career, and then a career in co-working as an operator, and then in all this time, I also launched design conference, which called a National Digital Design Conference, ND2C. Again, I have nothing to do with design, but during my Minerva time, I was doing a lot of these workshops. And one of those workshops was a graphic design workshop with a friend, Nida Salman. And both of us decided that Pakistan needed something better than just a design workshop. So we created the National Digital Design Conference, which is coming back next year. And then when I quit I2I, Hive, the I2I role, the CEO role at I2I was open. And one of my friends said, why don't you just like apply and see if it works? And startups and building businesses and creating access to capital, and that was very exciting for me. So I was like, okay, let's do that. And I ended up with my what I would like to call my third career, which was an ecosystem builder. But I think throughout this journey, even though it's very messy when you are inside that journey, but in hindsight, if you really look at it, all of it sort of the common thread between it was creating um, spaces, programs, and ecosystems that help us do better work. So it's all very disconnected, but at the same time there was this common line. And then, like I said, after I2I decided I want to rethink what my next sort of career would be, and so I'm at that point right now.
I mean, that's really interesting because I feel like, there have been so many twists and turns. And I'm
Yes.
sure at the time it might have seemed, chaotic, but I feel like you've managed to do so much. And I feel like just, you know, changing these career paths as well has probably, helped you acquire so many different skills and things like that. So a lot of, I mean, since we're, in the career and education counseling business, we get questions from stressed out students, what should I study? What university should I go to? The idea is that, they're going to invest so much in, especially in studying abroad, it's really expensive.
Mm,
And they want to make sure they sort of, choose the right degree so that they can launch a high paying career, because I guess at that age you see it as sort of a linear path, right? It's just
yeah.
upward
Yeah.
mobility is what you're looking for. And I feel like you're the perfect person to sort of speak to this, because considering, again, you've changed paths, you've done different things. But a lot of times I feel like students are sometimes too young to sort of be deciding at that age what their future is going to look like. So, what's your perspective on that?
So I agree, right? I mean, it's an expensive decision for one. So the anxiety and the stress around it is real. And then obviously we've been told, like you said, that there's a career ladder that you have to go up, and
Yeah.
it sounds like a very linear journey. And I think maybe like a decade ago or even before that, it was fine, but it doesn't apply anymore. So that's definitely one. Um, the second thing I think that's important is to look. I mean, what should give people a lot of comfort is to know that the same people with the same degree, that, quite a lot of people, same degree, the outcomes are so different for each one, right?
Absolutely.
The kind of job they get, whether they get a job in 6 months, a year, whether they don't find a job, well paying job, local job, international job. You can have the same degree and have very different outcomes. So, your degree or your first job does not define you. Its purpose is to educate you, right? Like that, I think, is a slight mindset shift in
Absolutely.
terms of it doesn't become your entire identity at that point in time. It's just some education that you're getting. Um, and you should probably think of it as, instead of looking at the final paper, the qualification or the degree that you're going to get, how can you make the most of those 4 years, 5 years, whatever, however long that qualification takes. And there's a lot of other things that come with getting a degree, right? Which is, can you build your networks at that point in time? Are you doing I mean, are you leading with curiosity rather than, oh, you're doing this because you're going to get a degree? Because at the age of 18, the entire premise that someone who's 18 years old is going to have their life figured out at that point in time is just, it
It's
just
flawed.
doesn't stand. Like, I'm
Yeah.
38 and I'm right now rethinking what I should be doing with my career. And I think I'm not the only one. There are a lot of people, right? So it's not special or unique, it happens. Um, so I don't think um, your degree should limit you in terms of what your career is going to look like. Yes, you can be smart about it if you want, but I think you should lead more with curiosity rather than trying to make sure that, okay, this is the only path and this is step one and there's going to be a step two that has to be linear. So you lead with curiosity, learn as much as you can. I think also the problem is, what's the best degree, best job?
Yeah.
I think that's the problem. We're trying to optimize too early in our careers, and that doesn't work. Instead of optimizing, I think we should be building optionality. Very early in your career, what matters is optionality. What will open more doors for you rather than close them? So try not to restrict yourself too much, because that's those first 3 4 years, even after your degree, are mostly exploratory, where you're trying to figure out what works for you. Um, and so, yeah, I think the stress, I get it, but I think that stress is a little misplaced because of the wrong kind of expectations and the wrong kind of perception that we have of what success in a career looks like.
Absolutely. So, I mean, since I'm just wondering, you've been on the founder side of things as well. How is that sort of, say someone has studied a specific degree, and then they decide after, their 4 years of studying their degree, or, however many years, they want to maybe do something else. They want to work in a different field. How do you feel that's perceived by employers? Do you think there's still, a negative connotation for them around that, or do you think it's sort of getting easier?
It's definitely getting easier for sure. And I think most people who are hiring understand that somebody who's just gotten out of college does not have their life figured out. I think what's more important is, particularly if you are aspiring for a non-linear career, like somebody like me, I lead from curiosity. I do things that, inspire me or that I'm curious about. I think what's extremely important is the story that you tell, right? If your career can be non-linear, but if you can create a coherent story around it, that's what matters. Can you explain your choice? So, for instance, let's say I worked in audit and accounting and I decide to go into marketing, right? um, as early as just graduating from a degree, one, it's not that big a deal. But two, if you really want to talk about it, you can say, I got a degree in this, but I'm really, really curious about how these three things work, or how I can apply this degree to other areas in my career or in different domains or industries. And so I'm looking for a place that can offer me that, right? I think too early in your career, you don't necessarily have to justify it. But if you have, I'm sure you have a reason, right? Why are you trying to, you did this degree, you
Yeah.
want to do something else. You've probably sparked your curiosity, for example. And that's good enough a reason that early in your career. Ideally, it should be a good enough reason at any point in your career. But of course, there are certain expectations that then come in, and you think about reputation and all of that. So I don't think it's a problem. It's not time wasted in a degree. Like I said, if you look at a degree more as an experience that you're collecting, and overall think of your career as a portfolio of things that you're putting together, each of which will at some point compound and feed into each other. I mean, if I give my own example, my work in audit taught me what a real P&L looked like,
Hmm.
what accounting processes look like, what systems look like in an organization. Also pattern matching in terms of, okay, what looks off in a P&L or a balance sheet or a ledger, for instance. And that applies to, if I'm going to build any business, it's going to help me in any business, no matter what industry I go into. If I understand what numbers make sense, how processes or systems are designed, so on and so forth, it has nothing to do. So the first job or your degree is just there to educate you and open up options for you. um, so even in terms of what your first job should be, like I said, you should look at what is the rate of learning that job offers, rather than is this the right fit for my career, because in all honesty, there is no career at that point. You're
Mm.
just building it, right? So yeah, I think again that stress is a little misplaced.
Absolutely. And I feel like, so your experience in audit, obviously all of that better equipped you to, be a founder, which is something that you went on to do. I'm just wondering, in terms of like skills that carry over, no matter, the field that you're in, what do you think those things are? What are some of those skills that students should sort of focus on acquiring, during university life or maybe even their first job?
Hmm. I think there's some of the usual that almost everybody talks about. So, decision making, prioritization, so on and so forth. Like these are general work skills, life skills that everybody needs, right? And they're applicable or transferable across industries, across professions, jobs, so on and so forth. But I think one thing that will really, really be needed in the future is the ability to sit with discomfort and uncertainty. um because I feel like we've gotten so used to instant results, and we've gotten so used to quick fixes.
Absolutely.
um and we try and live in a world of yes or no, black or white, without trying, we try and stay away from the gray. I think the ability to sit with discomfort is something that has really helped me, right? So being, and it's also a learned skill, or a muscle. um the discomfort of not knowing, sitting with the discomfort and being okay with it, of being bad at something, because you will be bad at something when you initially start at a lot of things, right? You'll be bad at them. um Sitting with the discomfort of not knowing what comes next, but still pushing yourself to go ahead. I think that's one skill that's extremely, I think, important in the future. And it's a learned skill. The other thing I think that has extremely been helpful to me is storytelling. I think if you can learn to tell a good story, whether it's about your career, whether it's about your product, whether it's about why you started a company and why you deserve the capital that you're trying to raise, um, I think that is also extremely important. And that sort of fits into the larger umbrella of communication,
Hmm.
right? And I feel like we're getting really, really horrible at communication, because we try not to communicate with humans anymore. Right?
Absolutely.
So I would say a very important skill would be, yes, you should be good at communicating with machines and with AI and with all of that, but at the same time being able to understand how humans operate and how to communicate with them and having hard conversations, and so on and so forth. So I would say those would be my top two. And then, like I said, the ability to learn, unlearn, relearn. Like, I think we've been saying this for decades, but it's so much more true today because things change so fast. That if you can't unlearn and relearn or learn new skills and things, it's very, very easy to become obsolete very fast.
Absolutely. So just, to your point about, sitting with discomfort. Um, so in your own experience, when you maybe decided to go down a different path, um, at what point did you learn that? Like at the time, did it feel, messy and chaotic, and did it feel like you were all over the place, or at some point did it get easier when you maybe,
I think when you choose a nonlinear career, you also have to accept that discomfort. I don't think it ever gets easier.
okay.
It's always messy. It's messy right now. Like I said, I did like 10 different experiments in the past 2 years. Some were great, some failed, some made me feel like, what am I doing with my life? Sometimes I would think, what would people be thinking? And then, the funny thing, the other day I was speaking to somebody and I was like, do you think like people now have started to feel like I'm doing these random things and they don't make any sense? And he said, nobody's thinking about you this much. Right? And it's true.
Yeah.
um People are not really focusing on you as much as you think they are. You're not that important in their lives. So yeah, I don't think it gets any easier. You do learn to navigate it better, or you at least realize what's happening. So it might not be easy, but you can make sense of what that discomfort is.
Hmm.
So maybe in the initial years, I would feel like, oh my God, my life's coming to an end. I don't know what to do next. What am I doing with my life? I'm doing HR and I'm doing co working and I'm doing startups and I'm doing governance and I am doing leadership trainings and conferences and, returnship programs, and none of it makes sense. And what am I doing? And I couldn't figure out why I was feeling that way. But at least I now understand that that discomfort is part of choosing a non-linear career. And if I choose to live this life where I can lead with curiosity, and do things that am I enjoy or I am intrigued by, and not sort of box myself into this identity that the world wants me to be in, then if I'm choosing the unconventional path, then my journey will look
Of course.
unconventional and I have to be okay with it. So, yes, I do have my meltdowns and I still have my days of questioning my life choices, but I think it at the same it always makes sense in hindsight, right? Like you can't make sense of things today. You will be able to make sense. Like I said,
Yep.
my entire career looked like all these random bits and pieces here and there, but now when I look at it, I can see that there was this thread that connected it all. So yeah, I hope that helps.
I love that. I love the idea of sort of, leading with curiosity. I mean, that's put a lot of stuff into perspective for me as well, because sometimes I feel like, I have a similar background. I studied finance, and then I went into marketing. So,
Hmm.
you know, at the time
But
it
I'll
can.
ask you a
Mhm.
question. Do you think your education in finance was useless for your degree in marketing, or your career
Absolutely
in
not.
marketing?
Absolutely not. Because so, something that, again, and I don't want to generalize here, but in my experience, marketing people really sort of, struggle with is like, when it comes to the non-creative side of things, where like you are dealing with spreadsheets and you have to create budgets and all of that. And
Mm,
I think my, finance studies sort of helped a lot in that
yeah,
aspect.
yeah,
I don't hate that part of the job. I'm pretty good at it.
yeah. I
So
think
yeah.
we sort of romanticize specialization a little too much.
Yeah.
Um, One of my careers have also been in executive search, right? Where I've placed CEOs, CTOs, COOs, CFOs, so on and so forth,
Mhm.
in Pakistan, in Dubai, in Singapore, etc. One of the biggest challenges in finding people at the leadership role, or the skills that most you can be an amazing person at finance, but if you can't look beyond finance and connect the dots, going into a leadership role is going to be extremely hard.
Absolutely.
If you can't connect your role or your domain to business objectives, getting into the boardroom is going to be really, really hard.
Definitely.
Um, so yeah, I think that entire concept of specialization, there is a place for it, but generalists have an equally important place in the business world. And I think with what's happening with agentic AI, I feel like generalists who can connect the dots
Yeah.
will be a lot more important than specialists. Not saying that specialists will lose importance altogether, but I'm saying generalists will probably become important, more important than they were before.
So at some point, I think these days, everyone wants to start something of their own, right? They want to do their own thing. That's sort of, at least, again, that's something that I envision for myself at some point, having my own startup. But it also becomes a bit difficult to make that decision between, having a steady paycheck that you get from your, full-time
Mm.
job, and then maybe diving into this thing where you might lose money. You might, it's just a very difficult decision to make. So if you could just tell us a little bit about your experience with that, and what do you think the best way to sort of navigate a situation like that is?
I think a generalized answer to this question is very, very difficult. I don't want anyone to take away the wrong message.
Mm.
And I'm not saying you shouldn't try to be a founder. It's a great experience being a founder, building something from scratch. But I think again, the the entire concept of trying to push everybody into entrepreneurship, I think I have a problem with that
Okay.
because it's not everyone's cup of tea. I think it's a great experience that you must have, but it shouldn't define what success looks like, right? So you can have a great successful career doing a job, multiple jobs, different professions, different roles within those professions, etc. And you could build a great career as an entrepreneur. And both are equally valid experiences, right? Um, there are different risks in both,
Of course.
right? So, for instance, if you have a job, there's the risk of your job, you losing your job, for instance, or the job market being really bad, or getting stuck in a bad organization where you never find growth, and so on and so forth, and that hinders future opportunity, blah 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 blah, right? So there's that kind of risk. In a business, there are all the other kinds of risk you mentioned. You could lose your money.
Yep.
You could be the one firing people because
Yeah.
you don't have enough money. That's not easy.
Of course.
So I think it's just for different kinds of people, it requires different risk appetites. And I think when making the decision, and I mean, I sort of feel hypocritical giving this advice because I started my business right off the bat. But I think if I had to give advice, I'd be like, if you can learn on someone else's money, why would you want to learn on your own?
Absolutely.
Right. So I would say do something, work somewhere, get a job, do multiple jobs, figure out what it is that you want to build a business around. Are you really good at something? Have you figured out distribution? Are you really passionate about a particular problem? And I feel like every time somebody talks about passionate about a particular problem, people try and look for problems to solve, etc. But you will stumble upon it in your career. Trying to find a problem very consciously is very, very hard. Most of the
Mm.
times, you will stumble upon the problem that you feel so passionately about. You're like, I'm going to give up the rest of my life trying to figure this out, right? Um, so, yes, it's a great experience, but you should do it for the right reasons with the right set of expectations. It's not glamorous, it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of hard work. You need to be good at a lot of different things. It's a completely different mindset that you need. And all of those things can be learned, sure, um, but just have the right expectations. So, I started Minerva really early, and I think I was extremely naive to do that. So I opened up this space. I rented out a space, in Islamabad, and I was like, okay, now I'm all set. And I've created this space, so I'll automatically start getting clients and all of that. And obviously, this is also like 10, 12 years
Yeah.
ago, more than that actually. So there wasn't a lot of conversation around entrepreneurship and startups, and there wasn't an ecosystem, honestly. Um, so I think I was really naive, and if I go back and think about it, I think I could have learned what I learned on my own. Let's say it took me 5 years to learn. I could probably have learned the same thing in a year if I had joined an already running organization, and then taken it from there. So it's a lot of fun, but it's also a lot of stress and responsibility. And like you said, you have this vision and you want to own that vision. Sometimes you have to change that vision,
Of course.
right? Because a business is only as good as the money that it can make,
Mm, of
right?
course.
And you can marry profit and purpose, sure, that is ideal. But if you can't make profit, you can't sustain long enough to have a purpose, right? Or build a purpose.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
I think just the right expectations are supremely important.
That is a really great segue into my next question, which is, about burnout.
Hmm.
So, for high achievers like yourself, and I'm sure, a lot of our viewers, that's a real risk, right? And especially whether you're doing your own thing or you're sort of, working like a high stress job. Um, how do you sort of mitigate that? Like, how do you prevent burnout? Just again, your own personal experience.
Hmm.
Like, how do you manage that?
So I think burnout is very real. I've gone through it, I've experienced it. But I think there's also a lot of, we're thinking a little too much about it especially that early in your career. It's definitely an important topic and we must talk about it. But I think if I was that early in my career where I was just graduating or my first 4 years of, being at work, I would think more about building mental resilience, which would do two things. One, it would help me not burn out too fast
Hmm.
or burn out at the first sight of an inconvenience. Um, and two, if I did burn out, I would be able to recover faster, right? So I would think of how can I build that kind of mental resilience. That's one. Two, I think um, what I've also learned is that a lot of other things look like burnout. So if you're disengaged at work, it might not be burnout. It's just that you're stuck in this horrible role that's not giving you any joy, not giving you growth, learning, whatever, right? And you're just disengaged, or you don't align with the values, or you've outgrown that role. It could be a lot of different reasons that now everybody started to associate with burnout.
Yeah.
Um, so I would think one, think about is it really burnout? One, and two, think more about how do I become more resilient, because stress, anxiety, if it's not burnout and if it's really just stress and anxiety, inevitably they're a part of your life and you will experience them at multiple times in your life. You can't run away from stress, right? There will be difficult situations, etc. But I think the more you put yourself in difficult situations, the more you build that resilience. Now that doesn't mean, and this is something I've learned, it doesn't mean that I have to take up every battle and be stubborn about, oh, I have to build my resilience, so I'm going to put myself in every difficult situation I see. No. It means taking on the right battles that are worth it,
Yeah.
that mean something to you, that contribute to your life in a certain way. For example, somebody might get stressed about having hard conversations. And if you're a founder or a CEO or an entrepreneur or a team leader, you will have to have hard conversations no matter what. Avoiding those hard conversations, you can do it for a while, but it's gonna blow up in your face, right? So, having those hard conversations is what will build the resilience and the muscle to have harder
Of
conversations.
course.
Um, so, I would say yes, think about what you can do to avoid burnout. Also, learn what your patterns are, right? So I think I struggled with work life balance throughout my life.
Mm.
And I always thought there was something wrong with me. Why can't I just like figure this out? And it's not that hard and it shouldn't be that hard and so on and so forth. But then I realized that I have a pattern and I have a rhythm of work. And it also comes from my ADHD, where I will go all in for like 2 weeks or 2 months and then I will collapse, right?
So you sort of
Um,
hyper focus on
Yeah,
something and
yeah.
then.
So if I'm super obsessed with something, there is no way you can take me out for dinner. I will be working on that thing, right? And just it's perhaps how my brain is wired. So also understanding what my rhythm is, where I understand that I will have these bouts of energy where I will want to work really, really hard. But then I need to rest, and rest is not something that I need to earn, it's a biological need. Just like we
Absolutely.
all need to breathe, we all need to rest, right? So it's not an it shouldn't be something that you do as an option. If I find the
Yeah.
option, I'm going to rest. So figure out your pattern, think about how you build mental resilience instead of trying to avoid burnout. It's the same thing, just framed a little differently.
Okay, but a lot of the time, burnout is also caused by, unsustainable work environments, unreasonable employer demands. What do you think are, some red flags for sort of work cultures like that, young professionals should sort of look out for?
I think that early in your career, you're right. I mean, some work environments are draining and exhausting. But I think what's interesting and what I've noticed recently with my peers, and again, I'm not generalizing, but what I've seen is that most of the times we burn out when we're putting too much into something without getting a return, or whether we're putting too much into something which doesn't align with what we want to do or who we want to be, right? It's not so much usually about the quantum of work. So I've seen founders who work 24 hours a day, but they're extremely energized. And I'm not
Yeah.
glamorizing that. I
Mm,
think, like I said, rest does not need to be earned. It's a biological need. You must have your sleep and your walk and all of that.
absolutely.
Um, but I think most of the times, what we are experiencing, the reason why we're experiencing burnout is not necessarily the quantum of work. It's just that we don't see where it leads us, right? Where that work leads us. And that sort of drains energy out of us. So that's the mental kind of burnout. And then the long hours and all of that is the physical burnout. So I think understanding which one is important. And so the red flags will sort of lead from there. Um, I think an important red flag to look out for is if the churn rate is high, like if people leave really quickly,
Mm,
it's a sign, right? Um, the other thing is also how excited people are to be at work, and I know it sounds like perhaps something privileged.
yeah.
So yeah, I think figuring out whether people like being at their place of work, that's an important way to figure if the organization is giving people the opportunity to speak up, be creative, do things on their own, not exploiting, so on and so forth. I think that's another um, way to figure out if it's the right place for you or not. um, I would say the third is if somebody is really glamorizing urgency. If an organization or your manager, because that early in your career, I think the whole organization does not matter as much as your manager
Yeah.
matters. So if everything is urgent for your manager, that's also a red flag, because it means that either there is lack of clarity on what's important, or they're not organized enough,
Hmm.
and also that they will not have enough time to invest in your growth, right? So if everything is always urgent, um, and everything is important, and the manager is always in a rush, then your growth could be at risk, right? Because they wouldn't have that time for you. So I think those are a few things. And then, we know the usual, which is if somebody's saying, oh, it's a high paced environment and a lot of exposure and so on and so forth. I used to not agree with this because I've run organizations and built teams always with the intention of trying to build the best kind of environment. And I always used all these phrases and words with the best intent and at heart, and knowing that, I will make sure that my team, even when they leave from my organization, they leave a better person, a better individual, so on and so forth. So I felt like, maybe that's how most people think. And so there's nothing wrong with calling your team a family, or calling or saying that, it's a fast paced environment, and, we don't pay, but we offer exposure. But then
Yeah.
I realized that my intention might be pure, but there's also a lot of other organizations that use that as clickbait to
Absolutely.
attract ambitious people and then sort of exploit them. So yeah, I think that the terminology that they use, um, but these are also very hard to figure before you join an organization, especially when you're early in your career. When you're a little later in your career, you can ask those questions. You have some leverage, you maybe have other opportunities lined up, so on and so forth. Early in your career, you'll have to, again, be open to exploring
Yeah.
and figuring out what works for you, what doesn't work for you. Because a lot of times, I think, like I said, I don't want to generalize these answers simply because I mean, in my early careers, working long hours is not a problem for me. I would still prioritize ideally, I should have prioritized my rest and all of that. But I was so focused on building my career and so on and so forth that those weren't the red flags. The red flag was if I was working long hours but not learning, if I
Absolutely.
was given difficult tasks without recognition. Those were my red flags. Those were the things that I didn't want. It wasn't about the quantum of work. It wasn't about whether something is out of my job description. Because if it is out of my job description, like I said, it's only adding optionality to my career. It opens more doors for me rather than closes them. So
Definitely.
yeah, I think go with an open mind. Um, Of course, don't let anyone exploit you, etc. But figure out what those red flags are for you at that point in your career.
Definitely. And I feel like for me personally, it took me a while to sort of, find a balance between, you know, just trying to do as much as possible, because that sort of, fit in with, like, the hustle culture, which we've, to some extent, I feel like we have moved away from that a little bit. In the sense, it's still sort of glamorized in some spaces, but I do feel like, Gen Z has a better idea of, I mean, they understand that their careers need to be fulfilling and they need to get something out of it, rather than just, trying to do as much as possible and be as successful as possible. um so before we wrap up, we talked about burnout, and personally I think, obviously, like you said, you have to, make sure that you sort of schedule rest because it's a biological need. um I've come to realize, at this point, that downtime is crucial for me personally. It helps prevent burnout. It sort of recharges me to sort of, get back to the grind. But what is your sort of favorite thing to do, to sort of recharge yourself?
It's really funny. When I took this break, um, the initial few weeks, I was under a lot of pressure to have fun. Right? Like, so I had gotten over that hustle culture of work and gotten into this, like, how can I have more fun? And I was so stressed because of it. And and I realized that it's okay to not do anything.
Yeah,
Right?
to just be bored
So
sometimes.
yeah, and we've actually, me and my husband, we spent a few Sundays where we decided we're not going to watch TV. We're not going to look at any screens, and we're not going to do anything productive, or like, we're not going to go and figure out a plan of, okay, let's do this, or how do we fill our day or whatever, and we're just going to sit and see what happens. It was hard. It was really hard, but I think it got easier over time, and it felt like a big achievement to not do anything. So I think, one, my favorite thing to is to test whether I can not do anything for a while if I want to recharge, and not put myself under that pressure of, oh, I must do something fun now because I want to recharge. Um, but yeah, there are certain things that I enjoy and I'll do them once in a while. So I love making puzzles.
Okay.
It's a great way to quiet down my always buzzing brain. So I have these 10,000 piece puzzles that I sometimes make. That's one. I love pottery. Again, it requires a lot of focus and it's also creative and all of that. So I do, attend like a pottery class once in a while. Um, but that glamorous what you see on Insta, okay, so I'm gonna have a book and I'm gonna sit with my cup of
Yeah.
coffee, and I have this
In my
beautiful
little
picture,
nook
and then I'll
and
put it up on Instagram. I've tried really hard to give up that need to fit into, like, my downtime, to fit into that idea of, oh, like a book and a coffee. It sounds nice, and sure,
yeah.
I'll do it when I want to do it, but the pressure of having to do it because that's what downtime should look like, I think social media has just done horrible things to us that way.
Absolutely. Well, it's been such a pleasure having you with us today. Thank you so much for taking out the time.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Aspire Talks, where we explore everything you need to know about studying abroad and starting your career right. See you in the next one.